Today's conversation is with Meredith Brown. I met Meredith when she was Ottawa's Riverkeeper. I don't actually know too much about her career, but she was a great Riverkeeper. And the Riverkeeper started a gala and helped the National Capital Commission redo the riverboat house right on the Ottawa River. I think you're going to really enjoy hearing from Meredith.
My name's McKenna Brown, and I'm going to be interviewing Miss Meredith Brown. To begin off, do you want to introduce yourself and a little bit about your work and what you're most known for?
Sure. Okay, so my name's Meredith Brown, and I am an engineer by training. I currently am the Director of Water and Land Relations at Canadian Geographic, and I'm most known for my work as the Ottawa Riverkeeper, starting a charitable organization and growing it, and being the voice for water protection in the Ottawa River.
Can you go into where this love for rivers came from?
Yeah, sure. I grew up, basically had this beautiful summer childhood of being on the lake with my family, never getting in a car, being on the water all the time, and drinking the water out of the lake, and fishing and swimming, and just kind of taking it for granted. One of the things that I did on our lake, we had a canoe club, and then I started going to these canoe clubs in southern Ontario, and the water was polluted, and I was like, ooh, I wouldn't want to swim in that. Really opened my eyes up to this beautiful little situation I had grown up in. And yeah, I always really was curious about natural systems and biology, and I started off studying ecology, but I always was very interested in rivers, how they were formed, and I was really unhappy with what a lot of engineers were doing to rivers. You know, when you see rivers that are urbanized, they're channelized, they were like basically taking nature out of the rivers and turning them into sewers practically. And I just thought, there's got to be a better way. And that led me into the University of Guelph engineering program.
How did you like that program?
There were days where I thought to myself, am I in the right program? The courses started becoming more and more interesting and more applicable. I really liked hydraulics because I spent a lot of time in rivers, so really understanding what was happening with the water with respect to kind of mathematical models was really cool. I quickly transitioned into a master's program, which was a very interdisciplinary program, resource and environmental management at Simon Fraser University. And my advisor was an engineer, and he was very involved in this water river diversion project, Canada's largest river diversion project on the Churchill River. And he was very against the diversion for all the reasons that, you know, how diversions screw natural processes and also the people living there. And so he really got into stream restoration, and I was very interested. I think to be successful, you really have to understand natural systems, which is great. And, you know, also what attracted it to me was my love of being out there, right? So I was working in BC at the time. I got to be out in the stream. I was wearing my rubber boots and waders to work, and I was in helicopters doing watershed assessments, and I really loved the field work component, which I think is a really good thing to think about when you're deciding what it is you want to do. Think about what you really like doing. And I really wanted to influence policy so that we made better choices and we didn't destroy our streams, because we never can really replicate as good as Mother Nature can.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Who are the people that you're working with on these projects?
Well, when I started doing the stream restoration work, I was working with a lot of government agencies, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and so fisheries biologists, and you know, I was like, you know, the engineer on the projects. I think my engineering degree was really helpful for understanding the natural systems, understanding what happened when we changed them, and it's on to my role as the Riverkeeper as well. In the end, my engineering degree was really helpful for my role as the Riverkeeper, and I could go into meetings with engineers and I'd put my ring on and they'd be like, oh, she's an engineer, she knows what she's talking about.
You mentioned you're working on a project now. Do you feel comfortable talking a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the reasons after I passed on the leadership reins at Ottawa Riverkeeper, I started working with Canadian Geographic. And one of the things I learned, like, this was a real surprise to me as I used to be so much like, oh, all the solutions are in science. And then as I started doing my advocacy work with Riverkeeper over the years, I learned like science is really important, but you know what else is important? People make decisions from their heart. You never get to a place of action and commitment without first having awareness and understanding. And I found over the years that one of the best ways to do that is through storytelling. My first project here was about the Great Lakes. It's still gaining momentum today. It's called Binagame. It's an Indigenous-led project. That project has been amazing, and now I'm working on this national water literacy project with several partners, including the Canadian Museum of Nature and a charitable organization called Aqua Action that really works on career paths for youth and innovation around the water sector. So this project is really media, and it's not just for youth, it's also for a general audience. But one of the big things that we're working on in Canadian Geographic is an education program that goes into the schools, and we create these big giant floor maps. So it's really cool. Most people are used to looking at a map on the wall, and these are like they fill a gymnasium floor. They're huge. And we're going to be launching it this month and letting people know that it's happening. The goal is really to raise awareness and understanding about fresh water in Canada.
You had mentioned at the beginning that a lot of engineers like to just slap concrete on waterways. I was wondering if you had any extra opinions on that.
The height of pollution was the 60s and 70s, and we basically used all our waterways as sewers. And in fact, engineers built all the sewers in all our major cities, and they're built to empty into waterways, and we've been slowly changing that over time, but it's really expensive. We just thought about them as conduits to get rid of our waste, and that's changed over time, but slowly. The majority of engineers are not thinking enough about mimicking natural conditions, and the one thing that's really pushing that a little bit is the insurance world, because the insurance companies are inundated with claims about water around flooding. Like with climate change, it's intensifying flooding. So I think there's a lot more people looking at what we call municipal assets or water services, so wetlands and rivers and what they provide, and keeping them, because we need those sponges at those times when we have too much water.
I wanted to asking you how you got into the program as well. Was there connections or education you think that would be important?
Obviously, like, the education path that you choose is important, but it's not the be all and end all. You can change your career path nothing is going to fall in your lap unless you're really lucky. But building relationships with people working is also really helpful. I'd say, like with the Riverkeeper piece, like that was very entrepreneurial. I had to start a business. I started a charitable organization, and I had to learn about governance and boards of directors, and so that wasn't easy, but it was very rewarding, and I grew this organization that is very impactful today and continues to be. And I think following your heart is good, and your passions, because that's going to really show when you're looking for work and talking to people about it. And I'd say, be creative. If you don't have like work experience, is volunteer experience, because it really shows your hustle, it shows your interest, and it gives you new relationships too. When I was leading Ottawa Riverkeeper, I used to have a lot of people who would volunteer for me, and then I would be their job reference when they were looking for jobs, and they'd call me up and ask me how this person was to work with and what kind of an employee they were. So volunteer work can be really helpful as well. And I think now, like, the master's is really helpful to hone your pathway. Depending on your undergrad, but if your undergrad is in it. But if your undergrad is more general, like a Bachelor of Science, then I think you're going to need to kind of hone your pathway. Maybe that's graduate work or doing a master's. Follow your passions.
I can't wrap my head around like being able to start your own organization. How did you start that and was it scary?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a risk, and I thought about that, because I was at the point where I was having um, babies too, and I thought I'm gonna have to do a lot of everything at the beginning until I build up a staff and a team. And am I prepared to do this? But I had a vision, and I really went for it. But it wasn't a solo journey because I quickly, like, I had a board of directors, but then I quickly made I started relationships with people doing similar things and, learning from each other, and was kind of imperative and important. And I had this Waterkeeper Alliance network. So around the world, and especially in the US, there were other people like me who were building organizations to protect their water. So we learned from each other, we lifted each other up, we amplified each other, we was instrumental.
It sounds like a very positive community. Was there any issues or communication issues specifically, or anything you had to overcome?
Well, one of the things that I did at Riverkeeper was develop the river constituency. So that was like get people on board. And the river is huge. The Ottawa River is massive, and there's over 200 municipalities in the watershed. But I thought, if we're going to protect this river in the long term, you need to have a community of people who are willing to stand up and, fight for it or show up at meetings. And you need to be able to mobilize them quickly when, a project comes down that's going to impact the river. So that was a really important and interesting process because I started developing these volunteer river watchers. There are people in communities up and down the river who would become like, a relationship into that community. I would never go into a community just on my own to say you should do this, this, and this. I'd have, people in the community who would be supporting it and interested in it. And they would also do monitoring and science for us as well. And over time, we did build a very large audience of people who care for the river and want to see it protected and are interested in the river and curious about the river. So people want to learn too. So you have to feed them knowledge, and you have to, again, it's about that awareness and understanding piece. And that takes a lot of time. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. So there's communicating out through all the different tools. We tried them all. There's face-to-face, again, super, super important. I'd show up, they'd show me their piece of the river. I think that combination of face-to-face and consistent communication, but the communication there has to be a reason for it. So, and I found people are curious and they want to learn. So if you can help them learn about the river, they're interested.
How did you go about fixing that?
When I had these parents come to me and they said, there's this national training ground for kayakers who are like going through gates and training for Olympics and stuff, and it's in Ottawa. But the site happened to be where there was a combined sewer overflow. At times, like raw sewage would be going into the training site. You'd see condoms, and clearly we need to work on the sewage file. And I quickly got myself up at speed with the cities, Ottawa and Gatineau. They're right across from each other. Where are their sewage outfalls? How often was sewage going in the river? And I knew that sewage was going into the river because I know how engineers design our cities and our sewer systems. But I realized this was news to people. They were shocked to learn that it's 2000 and we're dumping untreated sewage in the river. So I did a lot. I did a few things. One was a communications campaign. I worked with the cities to get notice of when combined sewers were dumping, and then I would let the public know. And I got some journalists involved, so the media started reporting on it, and people were just outraged. They're like, "Oh my God, I can't believe it!" I'd go to meetings, and the secretaries would be like, "Oh, it's so awful. I heard that there's more sewage in the river," and so it really got people talking about it, and I started a really positive relationship with the city of Ottawa and the engineers. They really wanted to do better, and they needed public support to spend more money. They needed money to fix problems, and so we all worked together and helped and got the federal and provincial government and municipal government on board to create this big sewage storage tunnel. They significantly reduced the amount of untreated sewage going into the river from the city of Ottawa.
Yeah, this does not sound like your regular 9 to 5 job. I feel like there's times you get burnt out. Is there any advice you'd have for like a nice balance?
Yeah, it's a great question. I struggled with that so much. And I think what I learned over time with experience is that you and only you are going to be able to create the balance by the decisions that you make. When I was I had my 2 kids, I was leading this organization, I had so much going on. And I remember meeting with this woman who was just amazing, so successful, so smart. She was maybe 15 years older than me at the time, and she just said, Meredith, you just need to take the time. She said, you need to shut your phone off. You need to it was all about boundaries and putting them in, and it's definitely possible. It's very hard when you're passionate, right? And you have this impact, this vision for impact. It is hard, but like all things, you won't get there if you don't take care of yourself. So that's an important piece of leadership in any field, is taking care of yourself.
Yeah, I guess with that, very different from when you were just starting an organization. What would you say your typical day, like Monday to Friday, looks like now then?
Yeah, so now I do less policy work, a little bit through some of my projects, but not as much. So my day-to-day is really I'm building projects, so I'm finding partners that have a shared vision and building projects and getting funding for them. So that part's really similar, what is going to be a great project that's needed, that's going to have impact, who wants to do that with me, who's going to give me money to do that. And then I build out the team, and then for each of those projects and where they're at, I have a day-to-day kind of check-in on strategy and, who's doing what, and do we have our right priorities going on this week? What needs to get done? Before talking to you, I was working really early this morning because I'm working on 2 agreements for funding right now that have to be out the door. And later this afternoon, I'm going to be meeting with my education team on some of the deliverables we're working on for our National Water Literacy Project. And then also working on, we're having a public launch, and so bringing in MPs and government employees that are working also on the water file to this event. And so it's a real mix of work, and I love it. And I love the creative pieces too, I have to say, because circling back to that piece about storytelling and hitting people in the heart, I think it's really important.
It sounds like a very rewarding job. We've had a lot of challenges. You said things take a long time. Was there any specific things that helped keep you motivated through these exhausting periods of time?
I'd say the people, especially, in my Riverkeeper days, I would have people come up to me and say, thank you for what you're doing. And that was really motivating. They were really thankful and interested. So I think that really helped with motivation. But I'd say, yeah, people, relationships.
Thank you so much for everything. Before we wrap up, was there any last points you'd like to mention?
I just want to wish all the students who are listening, the best of their times right now. I know it's a challenging time to think about what am I going to do with my education, and what kind of a job am I going to get, and how am I think with people your age, how am I going to do good for planet Earth too, because I know a lot of you are thinking about that. And good luck with that, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for being here.